Hi, everybody. Welcome to this virtual Journal Club meeting hosted by the BERA Practitioner Research SIG or Special Interest Group. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening. My name is Emma Taylor and I'm co-convener of the SIG alongside Claire Tyson. I'm also a secondary school teacher. I'm currently nearing completion of my doctorate. Journal clubs are fantastic ways of facilitating both the sharing of ideas and the application of research to practice. Claire and I are really excited to host this event for the BERA community this evening. And we're really grateful to Charlotte Bagnall, who has authored the important and timely paper focusing on talking about school transition, which we will be discussing this evening. In terms of the running order, we hear from Charlotte, who will provide an overview for the context of the context for the intervention of talking about school transition itself. We'll then split into two breakout rooms to discuss some of the key themes before coming back together to share feedback and for further open discussion as a group. Firstly, however, I'm going to pass over to my co-convener Claire just to introduce herself in a bit more detail before Charlotte starts her presentation.
Thanks, Emma. Really, I think quite a few of you know us from our newsletters already. Emma and I are both teacher researchers. I'm based at Homewood School and Sixth Form Centre in Tenterden in Kent, and we have been so excited to extend this format from our sort of school-based journal clubs to something a bit more experimental. I'm looking forward to hearing more about Charlotte's presentation.
Okay, shall I share my slides now? Yeah.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Bring this side. Okay then, so hello everybody, my name's Charlotte and I'm going to be talking about my research paper which looks at talking about school transition, which is an emotional centred intervention to support children's emotional wellbeing over primary to secondary school transition, and it was published in 2020 in Pastoral Care and Education. Okay, so just a little bit about me. So I'm a lecturer on a teaching and research contract in psychology of education at the University of Manchester, and I work within Manchester's Institute of Education. As part of the teaching role within my contract, I teach on the undergraduate educational psychology programme and our MEd Psychology of Education programme. I consider myself a mixed methods researcher. I'm particularly interested in intervention science, specifically intervention science which involves co-creation with practitioners involved within education. I'm particularly passionate about school transition and how we can improve children's emotional wellbeing during this time. And I also sit on several committees which I've also listed on this slide. Okay then, so what I'm going to cover briefly is I'm going to provide an overview of the talking about school transition intervention, which are designed as part of my PhD. I'm going to then talk through the context which informed the design of TAST, so specifically the significance of supporting children's emotional wellbeing over primary to secondary school transition, which is often neglected within research, but also within policy and sometimes practice. I'm going to also talk about the preliminary focus group and case study research, which inform the design, the delivery and the implementation and evaluation of TAST. And then I'm going to be talking about the evaluation of TAST, specifically the methods in which are used to evaluate the programme, but also the implementation and the analysis of the programme. Okay, so what is talking about school transition? So talking about school transition, or TAST, is a universal class-based intervention which is led by Year 6 class teachers. The intervention lasts 5 weeks in the final term of primary school, and it focuses specifically on supporting children's emotional wellbeing. TAST is underpinned by psychological theory, specifically resilience theory and prior research. In addition to case study and focus group research, which I conducted with transferred children, parents and teachers, both in the UK and in the USA, and I've listed those three papers on the first part of this diagram. And these three preliminary studies, alongside theory and prior research, inform the design of TAST, and this is the paper which I'm going to be talking about today. And I also have another paper which talks about the evaluation of the programme, which I've also listed here, and I will briefly talk about the evaluation of the programme as well, because I feel this is the meaty bit that we also need to, I suppose, discuss when we're talking about how it was informed. Okay, so I firstly thought I would provide a little bit of context about what we mean by a transition period. So transition, although an inevitable part of life, is a significant period for children. It can be defined as a critical period or a status passage in their development. And during this time, children are susceptible to change behaviours, and this can be for better, but it can also be for worse, and it can draw on an individual's ability to cope. And school transition, such as the transition from primary school to secondary school, is no exception, and in fact has been defined as one of the most difficult transitions in people's educational careers. And this is often subject to the simultaneous changes children experience during this time, academically, environmentally, but also socially. However, whereas adults are often concerned by the major life event itself, so in the context of primary to secondary school transition, this would be the transition to secondary school itself. For children, daily hassles such as getting lost, receiving a bad mark, fears, I suppose, of fitting in, making new friends, can be more stressful and more traumatic for children. And this is in line with the major life events versus daily hassles theory. What is particularly interesting is that it's the accumulation of these daily hassles which are specifically difficult for children. And this is in line with the strength model of self-control, which posits that our ability to cope and our ability to control how we feel during this time is shaped by the number of stresses we have in our life. And our ability to cope depletes as these increase with number, which I suppose is what's shown over primary to secondary school transition. So on this diagram, I've just listed some of the multiple simultaneous changes children negotiate during this time. So they face academic discontinuity from the way they're taught to what they're taught when they transition to secondary school. They can also face relational instability, and this can begin from as early as year 5, where children often instrumentally use social capital to move closer to classmates going to the same secondary school as them. And this relational instability can continue into year 6, but also into secondary school as well. Children face environmental changes, and these may be formal changes relating to the size and the structure of secondary schools, which are likely to be much larger. They can also face informal environmental changes relating to the culture and the ethos of secondary school, which is likely to be more mature. And many children also negotiate puberty alongside primary to secondary school transition. And this can mean that children negotiating 2 key rite of passages simultaneously, which can be harder than negotiating 1 key rite of passage, so either transition or puberty. So this can be harder for children. Children also face organisational adjustments, and this may be packing the bag for the first time, maybe taking themselves to school. And then the last, I suppose, couple of years, children have also negotiated COVID-19 and the challenges and the changes that have come alongside that, in addition to primary to secondary school transition, which can be argued to be another change children negotiating on top of already, I suppose, known changes children experience over school transition. Okay, so what is the significance of primary to secondary school transition? So we know it's a status passage, we know it's a major life event, and this can lead to better or worse behaviour. So it can symbolise windows of opportunity for growth and learning. So this is when children have the opportunity to expand their social network and make friendships with like-minded peers. They're also exposed to new teaching. So this may be a new subject, it may be different teaching styles through the number of teachers they're taught by at secondary school. And through navigation of these simultaneous changes, children's ability to cope and their resilience is drawn on, and positive adaptation can lead to greater resilience. However, primary to secondary school transition can also be conceptualised as a time of threat, where children are susceptible to maladjustment and difficulties settling in. They can experience problems coping with peer and school concerns, and it's believed that 68% of children report difficulties with coping with these concerns for the first term within secondary school, sorry. And children also can experience mental health complaints if sort of emotional well-being is not supported during this time. Okay, However, limitations to improve primary to secondary school transition experiences are minimal, and this can be subject to limitations at both the school level, but also methodological or empirical problems. So when thinking about the school level, transition provision, so preparations for secondary school, are often delayed within primary schools because of SATs. And this may be due to fears of behavioural problems or internalising complaints interfering with this high stakes testing period if children may not respond very well to discussions centred around primary to secondary school transition. Even when primary to secondary school transition is discussed, preparations are often focused on the secondary school the child will be attending, as opposed to general skills that can help children adjust to a new secondary school environment, such as be more organised or be more dependent. There's also problems when interventions are not co-created with practitioners, so they don't take into account schools' existing pressures, which can limit the sustainability and, I suppose, the long-term effectiveness of these programmes. And there are also methodological problems. So one key methodological problem is that studies often employ simplistic small-scale designs and don't take into account multiple assessment periods, which is really important when we think about primary to secondary school transition, as what is commonly shown is when children first transition to secondary school, they experience this temporary honeymoon period, where anxieties are temporarily stalled and they start to see secondary school through rose-tinted glasses. But then into the second term of secondary school is when children start, I suppose, to experience these anxieties, which therefore will not necessarily be shown if we use the pre and post test design. And academic and social adjustment is often prioritised within research above emotional adjustment. And this may be because it's deemed more cost and time effective, and I suppose it could be argued that it has more ready implications. But I think what is often neglected is that if children emotionally feel good about secondary school, they're emotionally adjusted, they have high emotional well-being, they're also likely to experience academic success, but also good social adjustment as well. So what was the rationale informing tasks? So we know that the number of children experiencing mental health difficulties is increasing rapidly. We know that government initiatives emphasising the need for prevention and early intervention is also highly, I suppose, important within policy. We know that primary to secondary school transition can be a period of vulnerability where most children experience some degree of stress and anxiety and some emotional well-being and mental health difficulties. We know that despite recognition of primary to secondary school as an effective point to introduce emotional-centred support intervention, we do have limited interventions, and especially limited interventions that have longevity and sustainability. So the aim of my PhD was to bring school transition intervention research to scale in real-world settings by designing and implementing a 5-week emotional-centred support intervention, which is called TAST. And TAST was informed by prior theory, research, and preliminary focus group and case study research. And what I'm going to do on the next couple of slides is I'm going to talk about these 3 preliminary research studies in turn. So for the first preliminary research study, I conducted focus groups in the UK with students, parents, and teachers to explore their retrospective experiences of school transition and how they felt it could be improved. As to date, we have a limited insight into these stakeholders' perspectives of this period of time. To do this, I conducted 3 asynchronous online focus groups with parents and teachers. So the decision to use asynchronous online focus groups was so that parents and teachers could respond to the discussion at a time convenient with them. And I also conducted 5 face-to-face focus groups with Year 7 students. So they'd experienced a transition and they were reflecting on their experiences during this time. And I analysed these findings using inductive thematic analysis. And what was shown was that in order to improve this period, there needs to be greater communication across systems, so between primary schools and secondary schools, but also stakeholders, so that all are on the same page and expectations can be managed. The research also made a unique contribution to the field of primary to secondary school transition in demonstrating the dangers of too much transition exposure, but also too little. Too much can cause year 6 children to feel overwhelmed and anxious, as children also need consistency during this time. But also too little can cause children to feel ill prepared for secondary school. So there is acknowledgement that transition provision should follow a continuum in line with children's needs during this time. And it was also recognised that peer support is crucial for children, yet it was often misunderstood by adults, and seeking social support deemed harder at secondary school. So these findings inform the design and the delivery of tasks. The recommendation pertaining to the need for gradual and sensitive transition exposure, providing both, exposure and consistency, was modelled through the task lesson structure and the content. There were activities incorporated to foster collaborative support between the home and the school. Particularly, there was a puzzler activity, which was child-led, and it gave children opportunity to ask their parents questions they wanted to know about secondary school and their experiences. But by the children creating their own questions, they had ownership over that activity. And there was also an activity which encouraged children to reflect on the differences in teacher and peer support at secondary school and how to overcome sort of the differences in accessing the support during this time. So for the second preliminary research study, I conducted a case study within the US. And this was due to research which has shown that children who are older or have negotiated a prior school transition can find school transition easier. And this is often because when school transition is delayed, children have longer to gain developmental skills necessary for their next chapter. However, it can be argued that these two ideas are in conflict. As within a 3-tier system, so when children make 2 transitions, so the first may be made at age 11 or 12, so in the US, this is to middle school or junior high school, and then the second transition will be at 14 to high school. You could argue that the third transition is easier because the children are going to make that at a later age, but that second transition, so at age 11 or 12 to middle school or junior high school, is likely to be harder as they're making it at a younger age. So what I wanted to do with this case study research was compare the timing and I suppose the age of transition onset times by comparing 2-tier versus 3-tier school systems, but also earlier and delayed onset times. So I wanted to see if there was a difference between transitioning at 11 or 12 as well, so looking at middle schools and junior high schools. Again, I analysed the findings using inductive thematic analysis. And what was shown was that the earlier the children made a transition, so if they made a transition at 11 or 12, the harder it was perceived to be. And school transition was also presented as a progression and not a loss within the US, which is particularly interesting when we think about how school transition is managed within the UK. Parents and teachers expressed the importance of consistency, and what they preferred was one transition. So they liked their child to attend an elementary school up until they then transitioned to high school. However, children found high school transition easier if they had navigated a previous transition, so say to middle school or junior high school. And again, these findings informed recommendations for tasks, so to focus on transition as a progression, not a loss. And there was also a reflection activity which helped children to recognise previous transitions they had made. So maybe this was moving house, it may be the birth of a new sibling, and transferable skills they gained from this transition, which they could then bring to the transition to secondary school. Okay, so for my final preliminary research study, I examined how children with pre-existing emotional problems cope with the added apprehension and anxiety that comes with school transition and how they're supported. So to do this, I conducted an exploratory explanatory timescale analysis of a special primary school's approach to primary to secondary school transition preparations. Again, I analysed the findings using thematic analysis, and what was shown was that children with social, emotional, and mental health difficulties negotiate more structural change and support across transition and need to feel safe and a sense of belonging at both schools. And again, this informed recommendations for tasks, so the importance of discussions being sensitive, supporting children's emotional wellbeing in the short term at primary school, but also helping children to develop coping skills so they feel safe and a sense of belonging in the long term when they transition to secondary school. So these 3 studies informed the design and the implementation of tasks, and key components were that it was bottomed up. So it was informed by preliminary qualitative research, drawing on insight, I suppose, from different stakeholders. It had a universal class-based design. It was teacher-led, which overcomes some of the limitations of standalone projects delivered by external deliverers. And it also had an exclusive focus on children's emotional well-being. And this slide here outlines the structure of the 5 lessons. So the first lesson focused on repositioning the transition as a progression rather than a loss, by helping the children to reflect on the skills they have learned at primary school and how this will aid the next chapter. Week 2 looked at building children's coping skills and resilience in preparation for secondary school by helping children to reflect on the similarities and the differences between the two schools. Week 3 focused on social support, so how social support may change when they transition to secondary school and how to set realistic expectations on how to manage this. And then in the final 2 sessions, the children engage in Bolton's cross-age teaching technique, where they translate their learning from the 3 previous sessions by presenting 5 top tips to a year 5 audience using a medium of their choice. So this may be a poem, it may have been a rap, some of the children did, it was leaflets, posters. So this was to showcase their learning, but also help them to put their learning into practice. Okay, so to evaluate the efficacy of tasks, 4 primary schools took part in the intervention condition, where teachers delivered the task intervention, and 4 schools participated as control schools. All completed a questionnaire which assessed their social adjustment in terms of their peer problems, but also their emotional adjustment in terms of emotional symptoms and transition worries. And coping efficacy was an explanatory outcome or change mechanism that we expected to change as a result of participating in the intervention. To assess the fidelity of the intervention, so how it was delivered within the intervention schools, the year 6 teachers completed a questionnaire to assess how, I suppose, it was delivered within their classrooms. And the project had a longitudinal pre-post and follow-up design. And on this slide, I've included the 4 testing periods in which we had. The delayed post-test, so time 3 and 4, enabled us to assess the significance of the temporary honeymoon period children often experience when they transition to secondary school. Okay, so what was found? So for both groups, there was a significant decrease in transition worries from time 1 to time 4, so from year 6 to December in year 7. There was no significant differences between the intervention and the control condition immediately following tasks between time 1 and 2. So in year 6, when the intervention was first complete, just before the intervention was completed and just after, there was no difference. And it was argued that this was due to the limited time between time 1 and time 2, but also the fact that they had not transitioned to secondary school yet, so they didn't have time to put their learning into practice. And there was a significant reduction in transition worries from time 1 to post-transition between the intervention and the control group. So in other words, transition worries decreased from both groups, but this decrease was larger for children in the intervention condition post-transition in comparison to the control group. So what are the implications for these findings? So bringing together what I've discussed today, firstly, this research shed light in a limited research area, so it demonstrates the importance of supporting children's emotional well-being during this time. And it raises the importance of supporting well-being not only in the here and now, but also thinking about long-term functioning during this time. There is also, however, a need for further longitudinal research, especially when thinking about large scale randomized control trials, but also measured development work. So what was, I suppose, shown within this research was the need, I suppose, to explore children's emotional well-being in more detail, but also to look at how, I suppose, children's emotional well-being is affected by primary to secondary school transition, and I suppose how we can target, I suppose, specific outcomes during this time. So thank you for listening. I just want to say a special thank you to children, parents, guardians and teachers who participated in this research. For my collaborators, Dr. Yvonne Skipper from the University of Glasgow, Dr. Jeremy Oldfield, but also Dr. Claire Fox. And also if you have any, want to receive any further information in the area of school transition, I've included my website here, which includes resources, including the task intervention, but also the papers informing the programme. And also a conversation piece myself and Claire and Yvonne wrote, thinking about how we can support children following the pandemic over school transition. So I'll just stop sharing now.
That's lovely. Thank you, Charlotte. That was really, really a big gallop through a chunky piece of work, which I hope people who signed up have had a chance to look at in advance. This was the idea of it being a journal club format, that we put papers, we put out a call for papers, we looked at the papers and we chose this one and we shared it in advance. I would like to have just said a few more words, which I should have done at the beginning, I apologise, about today's format, in that Charlotte, having shared this, we're going to go into some breakout rooms for about 15, 20 minutes. And then there will also be a Padlet for people to write on, and then an open meeting. And in the open meeting, if you're happy for us to record the chat, then we can use the chat and the hands up method. People can raise the hand on the icons on the chat on the bar, and then we can invite people to join in, because there's a lot to go through there. So we've just got 1 minute, Charlotte. So I think do you feel that this approach can be taken and used in different contexts? I suppose that's what people here are interested in today.
Yeah, so do you mean different contexts, I suppose, in terms of different transitions or in different schools? I suppose, yes, definitely. So I suppose some of the targets that were shown within the intervention, so focusing on social support networks, focusing on sort of coping skills and resilience, they're skills that are transferable when we think about any transition somebody may making. So whether that a transition to university, maybe transition to a new job. So that's something I suppose that can be transferable. We did also implement tasks within special schools as well. So there is another version that we created with slightly, I suppose, adapted sessions, which can be adapted to different contexts.
I believe we're going to Padlet time now, aren't we, Emma? Is it in the chat?
Yes, I think so. So I don't know if Paddy's put the link. Yeah, there's a link in the chat now to a Padlet where we can, as a kind of where we can feed back on some of the conversations that we've had in our breakout rooms, and that should hopefully fuel some of the chat that we're about to have now.
So we're going to have 5 minutes in the Padlet, yeah?
Yeah, so if you click on the link, it should take you to the Padlet, and then you can just post anything you want, any questions you might want to pose to Charlotte as well, if you didn't get the chance. So in case anyone's not sure how it works, you just go to the link and you can click on the plus sign on the bottom right-hand corner and just type anything up on there.
Emma, does my one show up the key points I've made already?
I can't see them. I don't know. Maybe I can't. Maybe it's strange.
Oh, yeah, now I can see someone else's. That's all cool. Working with parents. Huh.
Oh, no. Do you think we've got enough to go on there, Claire? Or
I'm just typing. Okay, so I'm just going to update. So we've got
a lot?
yes, we've got some stuff to talk about, haven't we? And we've got about 25 minutes, 20 minutes probably, haven't we, for discussion, just over 20 minutes. So are we going to keep this screen up? That's what we agreed, wasn't it? So that we can see these questions, everyone can see them. And if you wanted to, I need to be able to see the chat, Paddy. Obviously with this screen, I can't see the chat to see who's got their hands up. So I'm interested in particular this idea about learner identity. So why don't we kick off with this? Is successful transition about students feeling their identity as a learner fits with the school culture and ethos? So Charlotte, are you there?
Yes, yes.
Have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I suppose this question's tapping into the importance of sort of children feeling a sense of school belonging when they move to secondary school, because obviously within primary school they often have a very strong sense of school belonging. They've been there for the majority of their life, so when they move to secondary school, that's a transition to itself in terms of sort of feeling a new identity and feeling that they belong to the new secondary school environment. So yeah, I think successful transition should be determined based on, you know, how much they feel, you know, they have a belonging to that secondary school, definitely. And I know there is some work that's looked at belonging. It's work by Dr. Jennifer Simon. She does a lot of work on belonging. So a few papers there actually, which looks at sort of identity over school transition.
Interesting, because I think if they can't fit in with the culture, they'll find a subculture which they kind of feel they belong to more. Brilliant. Would somebody else like to raise a question or discuss one of these points? Do you want to, if you raise your hand, Paddy will unmute you. I can't see everybody. Oh yes, we've got Chris Fielding. Chris.
There's a couple of people in there as well. I heard you use the term daily hassles, and I think it was daily hassles theory you said, and it about the accumulation of small, lots of risks. Is that your term, or is that somebody else's term?
No, it's a theory. So it's the major life events versus daily hassles theory. And I think it was developed by Hallinan in 1992. So it's a very old theory, but it outlines the difference between how adults and children see sort of major events such as school transition. So adults seeing sort of the event itself being the most significant part of it, where children see the elements that sort of lead to that major life event as more traumatic. So all of the different challenges that make up school transition. And I suppose that's useful when we think about how to support children address those different, you know, concerns they may have, because we can sort of reduce these accumulating, so we can sort of look at, you know, how can we help children negotiate the environmental differences between primary school and secondary school, then focus on the academic changes. So I think that's useful when we're thinking about how to target and support children negotiate that.
I think
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
And I think in teaching life, the daily hassles, you know, children whose coping strategies are not bringing a pencil case, you know, therefore losing time in lessons to go and collect one, or the daily hassle of arriving without breakfast. There are lots of small obstacles that disadvantaged children disproportionately have to deal with. So I think that idea of being able to identify and remove obstacles, I think, is really important as well. That's good. Anyone else like to raise something? Sure, Emma and I have got lots of questions. If not, I'm just sorry, I need to scan through to see everybody.
I'll ask a quick question. Oh, Stephanie. Oh, no, there's lots of questions. Okay. Stephanie?
Hi, yeah. One of the things that we briefly touched on was I'd be interested in you talking more about how this worked with parents who didn't have positive experiences of school themselves, because I felt when I was reading it that like the children are encouraged to talk to their parents and ask them questions, and how you support the parents to talk positively and not just potentially say, oh, I hated school, or yeah, so I just wondered if you'd like to talk more about that.
Yeah, I saw this question when the Padlet was on. I was going to share it, I don't think I can, but as part of the intervention, I designed a leaflet that parents could have to help them talk to their children about secondary school, but how to do this using different techniques, because I think it's easier said than done, really. So asking a parent who might not have had a positive experience of school transition themselves to talk about school transition in a positive way. So what I did is I designed a leaflet which had strategies that some of the parents in the focus group had said, was useful in terms of supporting their child through the transition the previous year, and I designed a leaflet using these findings. So I'm very happy to share that with you, and I'll put it on the website at the end of the talk. But we had a leaflet, and this provided sort of activities for parents to do with their child. And again, the puzzler activity that the children did as part of the intervention, they came up with 10 questions they wanted to ask the parents about their transition experiences. And then the children brought this puzzler home to the parents, and the leaflet came alongside that, so parents could read the leaflet, I suppose, get their head around how they wanted to talk to the child about their transition experiences. And they engaged in this activity together. The children wrote down the parents' answers, and then they brought them back to school for the following week, and they talked through their answers. And this enabled the children to sort of, I suppose, share it with their peers, and also know that, okay, this was a question that 28 other children in the class also wanted to know. So I'm not alone in, suppose, having these questions about secondary school. So I thought that was a really useful activity to help sort of collaboration between the home and the school. But yeah, I'll share that resource with you. And we did a similar thing during the pandemic. So it was sort of this time last year, we asked sort of parents, teachers and children to outline what some of the changes they were experiencing, how to overcome it, sort of strategies that they used. And we also created another leaflet which had tips for parents, children and teachers on how to sort of navigate school transition following the pandemic and during the pandemic. And again, that might be a useful resource as well. I'm happy to share.
Definitely. Yes, please. Definitely.
Thank you.
Florence, you've got your hands up as well.
Sorry, I'm not too familiar with Zoom. That's not what I use in my workplace. I was curious about this workbook that the children put together, and you obviously hint at what the content is, but I was wondering, it seems to be that there's a lot of writing, which is fine. You're talking about 10-year-old children, they can write, hopefully. But I was wondering, sometimes using other methods might help surface to the children's actual feelings, whether it's drawing, whether they can take photos, whether you can do object-based sort of installation, art-based methods. Are these part of the program, or can you say a bit more about this? If they were excluded, why? And
Yeah, so the workbook was more, I suppose, to sort of guide the programme. So there were sort of activities where the children were asked to sort of colour their feelings towards secondary. So they had a picture and they could, colour how they felt during that time. There were drawing activities in there as well. But the final 2 weeks gave the children freedom to sort of apply their learning in a medium that was more suited to them. So in the final 2 weeks, they got into groups and they thought of, 5 top tips that they could give to a year 5 child who's about to transition the next year. And then in week 5, they presented it to that year 5 audience. So they could do a poster and they could do a leaflet. But what was more common is that we had a few raps. So the children came up with raps that they delivered the final week to the year 5 children. We had a couple of stories, we had poems. We had a dance as well, that we had. So they did have, I suppose, that freedom in the final 2 sessions, but some of the activities did include the children sort of getting up. So when we looked at sort of the continuum activity, so where they positioned, how they felt towards secondary school, we got the children all up in a room and they had to sort of position themselves in the room. So we had one side to strongly agree, one side strongly disagree, and the children, you know, position themselves. So I suppose when you say workbook, it does sound that it was just the children sort of sat down writing, but it was more to guide the teachers delivering the program, but also to guide the children so they knew, okay, we'll work on this activity first, then this one. So it was used as a guide really, but there were some, I suppose, active components of it as well.
Right.
More like a
Thank you, Charlotte.
journal. More like a journal than the thing. It sounds brilliant, really.
Can I just ask quickly, how did you recruit the schools that were part of the study? I know obviously you might not be able to say too much about that due to anonymity, but how and did you try to get a broad selection in terms of type of school, or I mean, I know it's difficult when trying to gain access, so I'd just be interested to learn a bit more about that process.
Yeah, so what we did is we were very lucky in that the schools that we selected schools in, so I was at Keele at the time when I was doing my PhD, so it was schools in the Staffordshire region, and what we used NCOP statistics to get sort of high performing schools versus sort of lower ones, and we looked at sort of percentage of free school meals, English as additional language. So we looked at sort of statistics, and we sort of, I suppose, grouped schools based on high, medium and low, and then we made sure that we had an equal number in the intervention, the control group. But we were very lucky in that the schools that we approached first time were very interested in taking part in the intervention, because the schools that took part in the intervention condition, yes, they had all the materials ready to go and they use those materials that year, but for the control schools we gave them all the materials so they could use it the following year. So although they employed their normal transition provisions during that intervention period, the next year they then had the materials. And what some of the schools did is then once they had the materials, they then said, oh, you know, could you look at it, you know, the next year, and they had the measures as well, so they could look at sort of the performance as well. So I suppose in that it was an intervention, it was freely accessible, you know, everything was there ready to go. Maybe an advantage of sort of getting schools on board. I'm not sure.
Of course. Yeah, I can see that. It's like a nice thing for schools to be able to provide for their pupils. Yeah.
It was the secondary schools that we were, I suppose it was harder to sort of follow up on, because all the work had already taken place in primary school, but we wanted to make sure that we followed up on as many children as possible. But many of the primary school children went to lots of different secondary schools. Some, there were very clear feeder ones, but others there wasn't. So what we did is we had to just look at the highest percentage of children going to certain schools. But in future, I'd like to look at other methods to sort of follow up on those children, whether it's, you know, we have the questionnaires that go to the child's home address, and there's a way of, you know, sending them back that way, so we can follow up on all of the children rather than the selected secondary schools that, you know, that take part. But yeah, that would be, I suppose, be a future direction really for the research.
So many future directions to take it.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I ask how you did the ethics for this?
Yeah, so I suppose we just went through it was just the ethics board at Keele, so it was relatively straightforward. I had to include all of the materials, so all of the intervention lessons. There was letters that went out to parents at 2 different time points. And what we used opt-out. Well, all the children took part in the intervention because it was something that was delivered in their PSHE classes, and it was delivered on a universal basis. We wanted all the children to take part in the lessons, but parents could opt out of the actual evaluation of it. So if they didn't want the children to complete the surveys, which sort of evaluated the program, they opted out of that, but they didn't opt out of the sessions themselves, because I suppose it would be unethical for sort of children to sit out if all the children in the class were taking part in an intervention. The head teacher giving permission to the teachers who were actually delivering the program are given permission to. The ethics board that Keele had, so they all took part in the program, but the evaluation of it they could opt out of.
Okay.
I think that's a method I would probably use in the future, because you know, it's a program that's, you know, part of the curriculum. Others might have different thoughts on it, though. I don't know.
It's that grey area, isn't it, where teacher becomes, so if you're saying that teachers are delivering this, and
Yeah.
yet it is also a research project, it's that power balance, isn't it, because the teacher is then using their power to become a researcher, and have that kind of implied consent, and that's always quite an area that needs to be really sensitively navigated.
I suppose what we tried to sort of isolate was that the research bit was the evaluation of it, but then the practice base was actually the program. So the program was something that the school was doing to help improve transition that year, but the research element was the evaluation, I suppose, and the papers that came out of it.
I see. So that the school involvement is something they might have done anyway.
Yeah, so they do transition preparations anyway, but it's just an addition to that, whereas they wouldn't usually ask the children to complete a questionnaire to evaluate it. That was the research edition of it, which we got consent for.
If there's anyone who's got a question but doesn't want to speak, you can type into the chat box. I can see a couple of people who perhaps haven't had said anything yet. Please feel free to wade in. I'll just wait for a moment before. Emma, I'm not sure. You've asked a question, haven't you?
Me?
Yeah.
I can ask another one. I've got another
one.
I
know. Ask another one, and anyone else is interested can type into the chat box or put their hand up.
This is quite this is sort of a bit of a forensic question about something that you wrote in the paper, but that stuck out to me as a parent myself, actually. So it was where it said making friends was seen as a significant concern for students, but misunderstood, and a teacher misunderstood by parents and teachers. And I was interested in how, as parents and teachers, we misunderstand that. How do we misunderstand that? I'd just be interested to know.
That was my question as well.
So I suppose it was that friendships was only discussed by children in the focus group, so parents and teachers made no reference to children's friendships when we were asking them, okay, what support does the school do to support children as they transition to secondary school? What sort of focus on, and friendships wasn't something that came up, but it was very, very prominent within the child focus groups. And within the child focus group, there's a lot of discussion around, the importance of friendships for them, but they felt that the parents, I suppose, prioritized their academic adjustments, and I suppose them learning and settling in sort of that way rather than the social adjustment. But then I suppose the misunderstanding came was that although it may not have been directly mentioned by parents and teachers within the focus groups of that particular study, when we did the COVID study, 2 years later, that was something that came out quite a lot, that parents and teachers discussed the importance of the particular year during the pandemic, was that they prioritized children's social adjustment, maybe because they'd missed so much of it with the online and the home learning. So that was something that may have been misunderstood, I suppose, in the earlier research, but this later research, particularly following the pandemic, is that there was a lot of focus on the children just settling in this year, just building friendships, just getting used to the new environment, rather than sort of the academic and learning pressure that came out more within the earlier research. So I suppose that was how it was phrased. But
yeah, no, that's interesting. So in the focus groups with parents and teachers, they were talking more about, but this was pre-pandemic, they were talking more about the importance of ensuring that their child settles in academically as opposed to socially.
Yeah, and getting used to the sort of the new routines of it. And then they felt that, socially, that would come later. But for children, that was priority. So if they, they settled in socially, they made new friends, they're more likely to learn, they're more likely to adjust to the new routines of the secondary school. So it was sort of that misunderstanding between, the two groups.
And I could probably say you could triangulate that with teachers who aren't necessarily that keen to sit children next to their friends in a class.
Yeah,
they might talk, and then you're trying to balance dialogic models of teaching with, engagement and attention and keeping them talking about the right stuff. You've got to be a better teacher if you allow children to talk in your room, haven't you?
Yeah, be able to manage the classroom effectively to enable that to happen.
For that kind of real talk. And I mean, I am definitely guilty of saying, you're not here to sit next to your friend. But then that's why you need a balanced curriculum, isn't it, with opportunities to do things with a friend, you know, clubs, activities, sports, you know, form time, tutor time, and differentiating between that and maybe time to sit and focus and concentrate. You know, it's, they do, if you asked a child why do they come to school, they come to school to make friends and see. If you ask the teacher, it's to learn knowledge, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
basic conflicts, which perhaps we haven't examined enough as well. There's an interesting question on the Padlet about the CATS sessions. How do the primary school children feel about the interactions with the secondary school children? Did you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, so with the CATS sessions, they all took part within primary school. So the year 6 children created sort of the leaflets and the poems and the storyboards and the raps for year 5 children in the classroom. So there wasn't that interaction within secondary school there. There was an activity that it did interact with secondary school children, and that they created like a passport that they could bring to secondary school with them. But the CATS lessons, they all took part within primary school.
Okay. There's another one on here. How can secondary schools carry on the work of tasks? And I've put it could be part of the PHRSE curriculum or program, because I know that links to Florence. You were interested in it being a more of a whole curriculum approach, sort of more embedded curricular approach as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I suppose it's just, you know, recapping on what was, you know, covered within primary school. So some of the work that may have been done within tasks within the primary school. So sort of, I suppose, recapping on that, but then also extending it. So thinking about, you know, okay, so now you're at secondary school, how can you build friendships with sort of like-minded peers? You know, what strategies can you use, maybe particularly with children who may struggle with that, you know, to make new friends? So I suppose within primary school, it was very figurative, it was abstract. So it was thinking about, okay, you know, if I experience this, you know, what could I do? Within secondary school, I suppose it's putting those solutions actually into practice. So, you know, what could I do at break time to make new friends? You know, what could I do to help me get used to the new school layout? You know, how to, you know, where can I go to get a map? So I suppose it's putting those more abstract things maybe you've talked about in primary school into sort of concrete solutions maybe. And I think that's definitely something that, you know, could be followed up into secondary school.
Interesting. Well, last chance, everyone. If you've got a burning question or an unanswered discussion point before we go to the poll. Anyone got their hand up? Let's have a look. Can't see anything. Is there anything on the Padlet board? We're interested in the impact of infant to junior transition. That's interesting. Have you looked at that at all?
I haven't, but I think some of the, you know, the sessions that made up tasks could definitely be translated to a younger audience. I suppose it'll be adapting the sessions.
Yeah, see as well. Brilliant. I think that has, what do you think, Emma? Do you think we've covered everything?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah.
Lovely.
If we go to the poll now, do we then come back together afterwards? I'm not sure. We didn't talk about that with Paddy around to say goodbye, or should we? Okay, poll first.
Poll first.
Great. So this is just a couple of questions just for us to gain an understanding of what you might have taken from today.
That looks like the answers to the poll. Do we click?
Oh, you can just fill it in. I think we can just fill it in and submit. So you should be able to fill it in on the screen and then submit.
Oh, I've lost mine. I'm doing really well today. My poll's disappeared. Did I close it? Oh, thank you. Poll 1.
Yeah. Oh, great. So that's good feedback. It's changed perspectives on supporting emotional well-being and following up with a change of policy or practice. And I think hopefully there might be some conversations that arise out of this meeting for Charlotte regarding how you might be able to support different settings with their transition process.
And also moving forward with our newsletters, please keep us in touch, Charlotte, with your, because it sounds like there's a lot of ongoing work. This feels like the beginning of something rather than the end of the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very early career as well, so a lot of it sort of kick-started other projects I'm working on.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I'm very keen to.
It's definitely highlighted, hasn't it, an area of need. And the reason we chose your paper was it offered some resources and solutions that were very practical, that could be used, you know, in context. My husband, as a shark lover, takes a little bit of exception to the idea of negative thoughts being shark thoughts. Has anyone picked you up on that?
Oh, and with the shark and the dolphin, yeah, the dolphin talk activity. No, they haven't actually. I had done it within my teaching, because we have a session that we do as, you know, as part of the MEd where we talk about transition. And I've used that activity with university students, and it goes down well too with university, to be honest. Well, I think it went down with 11-year-olds.
Endangered species, that's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Please on that note.
Oh yes.
But no, I just saw you dropped your email address in the chat, so thank you so much, Charlotte. And I know you just arrived back from Florida this morning at 8:30 a.m, so even more impressive to be able to speak so eloquently about your research. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thanks to everyone for joining us. We really appreciate your comments and some lovely feedback there. So the chat will be published for you,
and this event is has been recorded for those who were unable to make it this evening as well.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.